Welcome to Portals of Perception and to the Universalis project number 9. I'm here with Kyriaki Nikandrou and Henney. Welcome.
Hello, Karen. Hello, Aviv. Good to be with you.
Hello, greetings. Hello, Aviv. Hello, Kyriaki. It's really good to be here today.
So we gathered here less than 40 hours after we landed a 4-day intensive global Zoom event, 6 hours every day, which really means 10 hours with a before and after, with a global community, with some 150 friends in like 13 different time zones, including down under in Australia, New Zealand, Europe, the Middle East, Israel, and of course the US. So we felt that because of the premise of the journey, there is relevance for us to try to harvest some saliencies for the Universalis project. So how about if I offer a brief overview of that journey and then ask you to just free range with whatever you feel it will be on point to harvest from that to the Universalis project, that we do that first. How about that as a launching place for today?
Sounds good.
Okay. Well, so the first thing is the premise. We have 150 friends who come from different backgrounds and experiences and walks of life, and the unifying theme is these are each in their own right individuals who are pursuing the developmental inquiry, the spiritual inquiry, in the context of the significance of this time. And the central ethos of how we approach this is the sense that part of the significance of the transition, the developmental transition inside the epochal story of this moment in time, is that we are each as adults are called to take responsibility, to become agentic, self-arising, self-aligning, self-regulating, fully responsible adult. That is actually very much the temperament and the orientation that we propose to this transitional moment. We are post the moment of one all-knowing person. There is no such a thing. We call this the post-guru phase, because we are all teachers into our own journeys. And so the central premise is, can we cultivate and choreograph an experience where we can truly source and unlock and unleash the collective intelligence of the insight, the sentiments, the devotional pursuit, each person in their own right. And that's the premise, very much in the idea that we've now been on 4 years into this journey. These were days 42, 43, 44, 45. And the premise is, this is not a teaching situation and not a learning situation. It's also not a healing situation, although there are profound learning and revelatory moments for each and every one of us, and there are also many deep and moving healing moments. These are all secondary features. They're second principle to the endeavor. The first principle is, can we metabolize a shared mutualized inquiry about the epochal process that's underway, where there is value in the witnessing consciousness of that process, and how we can each be dialectic into our own experience, struggle, ups and downs, because each person is going through a tremendous struggle at this time, one way or the other. So that was the ethos. And let me try and describe at the highest level the choreography of the 4 days. I am serving as a Sherpa for the process. The part of the choreography, within that, there are many moments where we bring many voices. So I will sometimes frame a question, we get 40 answers from 40 different people quickly coming in and out of the spotlighted area. And so we began by framing, again, re-anchoring ourselves in the premise. And the first question we explored was, why deepen in our process? Why do we seek to deepen in whatever it is we do in our various inquiries? Which we feel is on point with really the first inquiry we brought to the Universalis project, when we looked at the idea of the 1,000 faces and we said space creating, space making is one of those faces, and deepening is one aspect of it. So we explored, why do we do deepening work? What is it we each want to deepen in? We did that in rooms. And then, how do we deepen? What are the different process modalities, process technologies we can use to deepen? And we have rooms for that we used as scaffolds, but what was even more beautiful was the live, in the moment insights and intelligence generated through many voices. And we took the first couple of hours of day one to journey into that, and then we played a brief segment from a recording that is part of a set of recordings that I generated to narrate the story of the epoch. And this is, we narrated a bit of the transition from indigo to violet, and it describes the anatomy of the crisis of belief. Why do people experience crisis of belief, and what are the 3 resistance natures that people find, especially in this time where there is a lot that is shape-shifting in the world, and practically speaking, nobody can claim that they have the truth, and there is no paradigm or map of meaning that is able to fully explain everything that is going on. That means we have to resiliently adapt and be agile, spiritually, theologically, philosophically, developmentally, relationally, in the way we manage and navigate in this time. And so, but how do we stay intact on the inside? That was the inquiry that we face when we enter the transition from indigo to violet. And then we spend the last couple of hours exploring the idea and the premise of being tethered in ourselves through the study of universal principles, and how through one's journey one can spend time grounding oneself in the core principles of how everything around us works, and how there is a way in which you first study those principles to discover how it works. A simple example is, I spent earlier in my journey filled a notebook with so many examples of the duality of life, the fact that we are forever surrounded by polarities, the day and the night, and the awake and asleep, and the contract and expand, and the slow and fast. And I spent months just getting so immersed in that there was a moment in my life that I didn't see anything else. I just saw everything everywhere I looked, and I saw dualities and polarities. And I also recognized how much I was prone, we were all prone, I was prone to be captured by polarities, and developed for many years the practice of transcending, disarming and transcending and integrating polarities. So that was an example of how you could do this in one way. And then I spent years looking at the idea of body, mind, and soul, spirit, so the threefold nature of human life, the past, present, and future, the unconscious, semi-conscious, and conscious. So the way we reflected on that was how there is a phase where you just discover and unlock the way the world works, and then if you become the embodiment of those principles, there is a way in which they begin to work in you and reveal the further potency, because you are no longer then studying those principles, but rather those principles begin to work through you, use you to express the stream of intelligence of life as you attune yourself to their nature. So that's what we did at the end of day one, and then we came back the following day and we explored a journey into that reframed shadow work in the context of the appreciation of the soul's journey. And I did the full storyline of this journey with Jeff Vanderkloot. We just recorded it yesterday. I will simply ground that what that led to is a realization, a revelation of how we each show up for this life with a unique configuration of qualities, and we show up with that configuration with the soul's brief to A, keep us alive in the human model, and B, facilitate, orchestrate, navigate our life such that we can serve our highest purpose by bringing to life those qualities and the unique configuration that we each are, and how, because of the nature and experience that we go through sometime with our parents, sometime in different settings, sooner or later there is a separating event, whether it's a big trauma or a small t trauma or disappointment or embarrassment or pain or grief of one kind or another, where we get distanced from that natural configuration, and as a result of that we experience first the pain of separation, and second, the soul then is experiencing the letdown of not being able to facilitate and operate at the level of its original brief. And because the soul is so committed and devoted to its brief, it develops a psychology which is some kind of a fixation that catalyzes what we described as a compensatory act. And the name we gave to the compensatory act was the ghost. It's a behavior, scripted behavior, that we continue to look to reproduce as a substitution, as a replacement to actually being tethered and present in that configuration. So if you were wired in your soul configuration to the sense of harmony, you'll be protecting anything that tries to take away from the sense of harmony, but it doesn't actually mean you rejoined the natural configuration of experiencing inside out the blissful flow of life through the presence of harmony or intimacy or strength or courage or integrity or trust or honor or any other of the unique configuration that we each represent, the invitation being that we can each discover what is the one or two or three core qualities that we were wired to discover. And we modeled briefly an example of an inquiry that would help us source and discover that revelation about ourselves, and then describe the soul inquiry that we may go through as part of the releasing, disarming of that ghost compensatory act, having reflected on the symptoms of being taken from that natural, as was meant to be, line to that conditioned, painful situation. And that led us to an exploration in what we call the inner conclave work, which is a process modality to discover the multiplicity of lives we have on the inside and how we can develop an inner dialogue of those multiple lives, not to suppress pain, not to pretend it's not there, not to bypass it, but to create space. This is where it becomes very interesting for us in the context of our inquiry in the Universalis project, to create an interior space that's forever growing and thereby also metabolize and transmogrify the energetic content of whatever it is that we grappled with, such that we can release it and rejoin retether the higher nature of our being. So that was day 2. And we then decided on day 3 to take it from the personal experience to the collective mutualized experience, because the recognition was that we are in a potent moment in the epochal journey where many collectives all around the world are struggling, because the infrastructure that supported them up until now seems to be melting away and imploding. And for a reason we will probably explain in the next conversation. And so we asked, where would we want to explore this idea of collective shadow or collective ghost working in the system? And we essentially said you can make that exploration anywhere in the world, because there are many places in the arts, in the sports world, in politics. You can literally go anywhere in the world. In the US, you can look at the US Congress. In Britain, you can look at the British Parliament. In Israel, you can choose to look at the Israeli Knesset, or anywhere else at any other parliament, including in Greece, where Kyriaki is, and we could make a study of how the political parties are largely captured by certain agendas, by certain, what we can easily describe as not really free chosen behavior, that one that's agentic to the people, because they are captured by the expectation of the polarized two ends of the political spectrum. But if you move out of the political spectrum and look to find in the world of fashion, or in the world of arts, or in Hollywood, or in Wall Street, you will find any space in the world we will travel, we will find the typologies of one kind or another of collective shadow, group shadow, which we're describing as scripted replay of a ghost behavior, because the system, a bit like what I described for in the individual case, is separated, distanced from its higher potential, higher optimal way of functioning. And we decided we will actually explore it in the context of developmental intentional communities, because there are many pathologies in many of those as well. And we said, let's do that work, because many people come from experience in communal endeavors, and we can be humorously and lightly and with levity, in a relaxed way, we can be reflective on all that we experience that doesn't work, such that we become a safe space in the sense of we can treat it lightly with humor to see what can work. So the inquiry and the exploration there was, what is below the line that's holding us back from realizing that potential, and what then are the higher elements, more potent elements, when we re-tether to what we describe as the natural line for human endeavor. So we went there because we said there is fascinating content to be unlocked in the study of, for example, tribal conduct, but that would be putting it outside of us, looking into anthropological research in the past. We wanted to not absolve ourselves of the need to be reflective on the inside, such that as we explore, we can always be in the inquiry both on the inside and in the mutualized space, which is part of this invitation to be agentic, tethered in yourself while we are inside the mutual space, such that we indeed become a witnessing agency for those insights, each in our own interiority and our own experience, and together with others. So we did that on day 2. Easily could have taken a full 4 days or a full week or a full month curriculum-wise. So in fairness, we only seeded this work. There is a lot more to come back to. The idea was to seed a brief of how to go through the steps of the inquiry, such that it can be taken up, and in a different setting, we'll probably go deeper into that brief itself. And then we came the last day, and we did a piece that we thought we will get to on day 3, which was a specific case in point for communities, which I also recorded yesterday with Jeff Vanderkloot, which narrates the story of the teacher's journey and the double guru-student trap and the golden shadow. So we did that. It was a fascinating conversation with Jeff, because he is a spiritual teacher in his own right, and is involved, I forget the name of the association, to do with ethical behaviors in organizations and spiritual communities. And he said he eagerly waits for this content to be released so he can share it with all of them. So that recording was yesterday. So that's the journey. And then on the final piece of that last day, we did a deep dive into trying to diagnose this epochal moment, which we will record in the next episode here today. And it was an inquiry in the context of the sevenfold epochal nature that we explored on previous recordings. And specifically, we focused on the question of why does it feel like everything around the world is falling apart? The very system that we know as liberal democracies and global institutions seems to be losing the credibility for several years, and it has reached now cataclysmic crisis point in several areas and countries all around the world, in the US, in Europe, in the UK, and certainly as we speak in Israel. And so we worked through mapping some way to describe the crisis point, this moment in time, from an epoch map storytelling point of view. That's what we did in this epoch journey, 4 days with the global community. I didn't think it was going to take me so long to retell the story, but there I just did. So I invite you to, this was to give you a platforming to go wherever you want to go with whatever you feel is most relevant and prime inside the Universalis inquiry, Universalis project. So Karen, perhaps I can come first to you with, take it wherever you want to take it, please.
Yes, I'm still absorbing the 4 days, literally. Right, really from the start, it's a practice actually I learned in a previous 4-day process, which was to take a thread and to deepen it and keep it with me throughout. And so that there was always an anchor point. And it's interesting how the one I took has woven through the story outline that Aviv has just shared. Deep in the heart of the Universalis work, we've talked a lot about our own self-regulating, self-aligning, self-arising, unique, alone decisive journey. And it occurred to me that I've used these terms and I have an understanding, but like everything that we touch, it can be explored. And it's a little bit like this probably scientific term where you put something into something and it expands and it starts to tell its story. And spending time with each of these has been very revealing, and they have begun to start to, in a way, tell their story. And
this is just too precious to lose, the practice you shared. Let me just re-ground us in the practice you're sharing, because you're actually demonstrating the practice, and I want whoever is traveling with us here to not lose the practice you offered. What you describe is a practice that enables you to, the benefits of the practice is how do you engage in an intensive long day process and discovery with a large group of people in a way that you remain on the wave of whatever inquiry is traveling, but you don't lose agentic tethering in self. How do you hold yourself in these two places? And the practice you're describing, Karen, is you come along and whatever earlier on resonates for you is your moment of contact or entry into the journey, rather than leave it as a head information as, oh, okay, this was one item we talked about. Now it becomes an active, interior, alive, dare I say, sense organ that is metabolizing and coming for the whole journey of the day with you. So in other words, you're not just tracking what other people are saying, what the facilitators of the day is saying. There is something that you are weaving and building inside your own interior weave of the discovery, so you never lose the interior conductivity, because you are working in yourself while you are engaged in following the trace of the mutualized discovery. I think that's what I heard you say, and I didn't want to lose it. Is there anything else before you actually continue that thread? Is there anything you'd say about the practice?
Yes, I think you described it really well, because it is that difference between sometimes there's a lot of information and there are a lot of things that you may have a life about, but might not necessarily access at that point. And knowing that there's some, like a safe home you can go to, of an inner conductivity that, in the way you talked about before, when you were talking about the inner conclave work, and you're talking about being separated from the flow, and it's a way of generating a flow that you can, like coming home, you can think, right, I can go there, maybe before the process, after, during, and it keeps the tethering, and it itself has a life that's deepening along the way. And the significance of it on this particular journey and within what we're talking about now is that within the space making, there are many, many elements of deepening that we've spoken of, and we can open up more. But the thing about being self-regulating and self-aligned and all these different processes that I'll open up a little, they all, they're a little bit like a river, or if you're looking at a mapping, in a map you will have a road or a river or some sort of artery that flows through, and it connects the higher and the lower, or where you're going from where you've come from. There's some trajectory within a map, and the nature of these 5, as I'll call them, they are all a little bit like that in different ways. They have different characteristics, but they are very, very crucial in the whole context of space making because of the flow that they allow. And if I go through them briefly, just to say how they're becoming a little alive in this process. So if we think about self-arising, there's a very natural process of arising when we see the sunrises and we see the rising of children and young life. But what we're talking about in self-arising is an actual deliberate, conscious application to further something that you've chosen. This is bringing the self into it. And that has a quality of creativity, generation. You're bringing something to life that might never exist if your particular configuration doesn't do that, doesn't have that self-arising. And then I was thinking about self-aligning, and that has a different nature. It seems to imply to do with your energy life and bringing things into a line. So instead of being, and your energy is shooting off in many, many directions, or even having arguments with themselves and completely neutralizing in the way of the polarities, the actual alignment allows a focus, it allows a direction, it allows something to be going somewhere and could even be recognized, because all of these lives, they have a generation within us. And like a river, it has a spring. It starts somewhere, but it's going somewhere, and it meets something at the other end. And if you think about that in a non-linear way, we're not talking about A to B to C. We're talking about a dimensionality of how things can overlay. So the next one I looked at was self-authoring. And that opened up the whole world of stories and narration and characters, and how we as humans have this wonderful ability to bring things together. We can join things, we can separate things, we can create narrations, poems, art, and along that way there's a quality of refinement. And it's quite extraordinary how, looking at these different lives, how they begin to differentiate and how rich they all are. So then we come to self-regulating, and I thought of that a little bit narrowly and a little bit like there are the analogy I thought of today, if you're going from, say, I live in England, so if you're going from the south of England to the top of Scotland, they are fixed places, but how you get there, you can choose. So there's this always a balance between what is regulated and your choices along the way. But there's another dimension to that which is beginning to come into play, and it's something to do with the overlays and the dimensions of how the universe can interact with the human, and how we need to work with that and not against it. And we need to find those regulating patterns and cycles of the truths, but not as fixed commodities. I mean, some are fixed, but it's a little, there's another whole layer of subtlety that is beginning to reveal itself. And then we come to the alone decisive, which in a way overarcs over all of these. And it really speaks of the journey from when we're born to when we pass from this life, and all the interactions along the way, and the choices we make, and what ingredients we bring into our, what we've been talking about, our inner conclaves, and the configurations that we choose to bring into fruition, to engage with human life and all that we meet in a way that's progressive, updating of our time at the real leading edge of our lives, and where we, how our purposeful life is expressed as alone decisive. I mean, these are very, very brief overviews for extraordinary lives that we are gifted to have the opportunity to explore and bring into fruition as best we can.
Yes.
I'll stop there.
Yeah, beautiful. So, by way of offering a bit of the scaffolds to the sampling you offered, where you actually integrated three things. You integrated that one thread that you picked up in the beginning that we talked as a practice to stay with and evolve. You taken it through the work of deepening, and you deliberately and specifically built on an inquiry that we presented in that moment in the exploration, and demonstrated how you could bring into it your own working. So let me put some of the scaffolds. I didn't know if we will use it, but I have it ready. So, I mean, we just are going here live with the flow, and we are discovering what wants to reveal itself. So I think we are calling this the Universalis project number 9, Deepening in Evolutionary Mysteries. And this is really the visual. We started the journey many months ago, suggesting that, yeah, let's begin with space makers and space creators. And curiously, we are discovering that what we did these last 4 days had an important element of that. There is also the realization that a lot of what we have done has about it perception openers, connectors and integrators, and conductive ecology creators. These were also features in this 4 days journey. So we asked, why deepen? Why are we endeavoring to deepen? Which you just demonstrated a process of deepening. And I'm going to go through this very swiftly. So we just have it here. We said, well, we deepen to build a stronger foundation and stability. Now, this is the point where we got 40 or 50 responses from people that were more elegant, more intelligent, and more broad-reaching than what I created here just as a foundational scaffolds in the slide. And we played both the slide and what was emerging live on point. To have it here with us, let me go through it swiftly. So this is the space we talked about: create and expand space, birth new sensitivities and capacities, become an antidote for a superficial world. So these are all different, not complete answers, but starter answers to this question: why do deepening work? We do deepening work to use up the surface level to activate latent potential. We do deepening work to access new resources and conductivity. We do deepening work. It's a beautiful way of appreciating this. If you are a port and you want bigger ideas, bigger intelligence, bigger projects, bigger whatever to find you in your port, unless you dig deeper and you have a deeper port, that larger vessel cannot come to your shore. So this talks to what is the preparatory work you need to do, you must do, to become available for a bigger task, a bigger project, a bigger mission, bigger body of work that you may need to develop. Enable a bigger vessel to come to your shore. And then become available to your purpose and what you love. That's a good reason to do deepening work, because unless you offer more of the depth of who you are and what you can bring to the table, then unless you do that, unless you offer that facility, you'll only be able to realize your purpose and what you love to the degree of the depth that you make available. And we do deepening work to test and to mold ourselves, so to become safer for finer domains and finer realms. And we do deepening work to serve and to do world work. That is to say, to do this not just for ourselves, but to become a place, a living process, what we describe as a dialectic consciousness, one that's prepared to metabolize the world situation. And we do deepening work to purify and heal as you build deeper connections, and to foster regenerative continuance. Because as you deepen in the causes that you support and you love and appreciate, these causes deepen in you, and therefore they find regenerative continuance in you, while you find regenerative continuance inside these causes. And then we do deepening work to develop readiness for what we describe as the violet phase of the epoch, and to find and cultivate immunity for the shape-shifting world around us, and to a degree the imminent collapse of all sorts of systems around us. And finally, in this prodding exploration, I said, well, we do deepening work to do the ensoulment we must engage in, to embody and give rise to a higher soul. Higher soul is a definition of ensoulment work, in that by rewiring ourselves to the kind of operating system we want to give rise to through and for the epochal shift. So that was some of the background. We didn't actually go through all these because there wasn't the time, so I'm using the opportunity here to reveal some of the boxes we didn't get to in the mutualized inquiry, because the emphasis there was more about the intelligence that was emergent in the moment through different voices. And then we asked, how do we deepen? What are the ways and arts of deepening. And we brought some of these by describing 9 arts and 3 main deepening causeways, and describe that inquiry with self and inquiry through conversation with another is a potent, most powerful way to deepen, and is perhaps the main application we use in the work. Framing of inquiry and staying with these inquiries and going into deeper and deeper and deeper inquiries. Especially when we couple it with the art of abiding, the art of staying with, being with, deciding to not be captured by the impatience and the velocity of this postmodern time, but reground ourselves in truly the ancient and natural art of abiding, and the process technology of surrounding yourself with what it is you are exploring and immersing in. That it's the idea that if you have an inquiry, or if you have something that you want to deepen with, rather than just attack it or tackle it head on, you surround yourself with all its many facets, and you immerse yourself in its many expressions, and that is a major way to deepen and to create space for it in you and in your consciousness and your experience. And then that part of that exploration always involves integrating and melting and merging polarities, because whatever we look at, again, as we said, this is a planet of polarities. When we are able to integrate the polarity, to melt the polarity, all of a sudden a whole new depth and space opens for us that before that was not available, because we were contracted in that polarized equation. And then, of course, there is the way and the art of meditating and contemplating the 2 adjacent practices. Not just 2 practices, but many, many different kinds of meditation and contemplation, many of which are there to facilitate a deepening process. And the art of practicing and building readiness in the human system, which we also call the human complex, because it has this complexity design to it. Complexity to mean we can't take the parts and then bring them back together. They are forever engaged in an inner calibration loop, such that it's a living system. And the reason we emphasize this art is because we're not doing this work only with words, only with our heads. So much of it is done somatically, energetically, with the inner state, with the interior conductivity, and with what we cultivate to enable these. And then we suggested that all forms of arts, they represent profound ways to deepen, and activating, connecting, and conductivity generating, which I feel is very much what you demonstrated, Karen, in your example, in the way you were flowing those 5 dimensions of the inquiry, and finally imbuing ourselves in the presence of what it is that we are inquiring and exploring, and doing its ensouling work is how we deepen. And I added here that stepping into service, into function, knowing that I'm engaged in a certain capacity, not just for myself, but in service to a certain endeavor, is, I find, from my experience in my own, the way I'm wired, provides me the greatest space and the greatest depth, because I transcend the person that I am in service of something bigger than me. And similar to that, and adjacent to it, is the idea of taking up a research work, embracing a project and or a tasking inquiry. So these were some of the scaffolds to this, and that in slightly a different way to the way you framed it here was the inquiry you developed. I kind of updated it for our sake, so I don't have all of the, but I mean, you answered why we have focused on becoming alone decisive, agentic, self-arising, self-regulating, self-aligning, self-authoring. So you just framed a beautiful answer to that. The answer is not so much an answer to the question, but what you demonstrated is how you can be with an inquiry, surround yourself with its expressions in different aspects of life, and the exampleship I believe you brought to life is how a deepening process is moving away from the linear shortcut that we are so much wired to in this postmodern age. Somebody asks a question and you try to answer it in the shortest possible way. Well, that's a skill one needs to have as well, for example, in the business world, but our endeavor is more to access the latent capacities such that we indeed give rise to the multiplicity that we can be, and that is one way to come into it. So a bit of a bridging to the bridge you offered. Anything you want to say to that before we go to Kyriaki with the first question of what is alive for you from the 4 days that you want to bring to this conversation?
Yeah, just very briefly, one thing was, it was the answer to the question that turned up when you asked that during the seminar, and I just wrote down one line, and it was filling and creating space at the same time. And just to, I think you've explained that really. It's because in a way, it's what you don't want to have, what doesn't fit, what is no longer required, but you don't have a void. And so to deepen is what you bring into the space that will allow ultimately more space and more connection and more of that inner flow through that process.
Thank you. So you are just making a potent and important distinction for us for the entire inquiry of creating space making, where you're saying creating space is facilitated by filling that space with presence. We are not describing a void, rather we are filling that space. We're propagating into the space the presence that enables whatever it is that we're seeking to invite to grow inside the space. This is why we need to sometimes stay in the conversation for 54 minutes for that additional piece to drop in that changes everything that was spoken before, because that insight you can retrace through everything we said so far with that insight, and there is a new meaning that and perception that would come alive in it. So thank you. Please, Kyriaki.
Yeah, it's getting more fascinating by the moment. So, yeah, so in practicing what Karen revealed as a practice, how to take one thread that spoke to oneself from 4 days process that was like a journey to the universe and back. So there were so many revelations in it coming from many different people, including a lot of special content that you brought on the table, Aviv. Yeah, concerning deepening and self-authoring, I would say that it's a very important part I'm thinking that maybe one of the great propulsions in the Renaissance, in the human evolution, was that um, we are born like a tabula rasa, and we can self-author ourselves. But on the other hand, there is this universal part, this universal, maybe angelic, like gossamer, that is within our root, within our soul, within our psyche, that, as you said, is unique to each one. And how we can bring that to life and align with that, and bring it more into the surface, into the expression, into the service of the collective. That was an aspect that maybe we touched when we tried to open up the special talents that are in each one of us, and how maybe they are suppressed or we are separated from them. And also this interweaves with the three crises on belief that you brought at a certain point. Crisis one being that we need to have a story, a myth that translates and explains the reality we see around us, that connects things. The second crisis is, how do we relate to that story? How do we include ourselves in a story? What is our part to play in this story? And then through that, how we can serve or answer to the needs of the collective in our time, in our neighborhood, in our family, in our nation. And that also starts with how this special 1 or 2, 3 main roots of our being that are unique to us. And I can confirm that, being a mother of two girls, that they each have a particular idiosyncratic assembly and nature that appeared from very, very young, because I was tracing it, I was writing it down, I was mapping it. And later education and this and that separates you from it, and various traumas and our ignorance. Also, as parents, we make mistakes and traumatize maybe these natural inclinations. So I was very moved by this. Especially there was a part in the process where, with a lot of care, sensitivity, and mastery, I would say, you helped two of our friends to touch on these deeper parts, and by asking them, remember a happy moment from your childhood that you really felt aligned with your nature, and you really felt happy and belonging, and they immediately came very strongly with a memory, very spontaneously, very, very passionately. And I could see it was a sacred moment for me, because I could see, in a way, the unique investment that these two human lives represent. Later on, I was thinking about it. I fell asleep, and somehow, I don't know, maybe this work that we've done is psychoactive, and some memories came to mind of my own childhood. Actually, a whole chain of them, of good memories that I felt were unique. Either being in adventures with my cousins, or looking at the stars, or feeling the warmth of my family, or singing. And they were opening within me, as I would say, it's like with the jasmine pearls that open in the tea, filling me with a sense of love and self-appreciation. And I want to thank you for that. And also, where does this leads me to the inquiry of that there is these sensitive, sacred parts in us, and how we can, and when we are tuned to them, we lose, in a sense, the sense of space, time. We arise in the best of us. There are special capabilities, feelings that rise because we are in flow. There is no barrier between us and things around us. We feel we belong. I call this state the sweet refuge of trusting. And I've discovered that place early in age. So yeah, I'm thinking how that relates maybe to our inquiry on Homo Universalis, because I think that is the first step. I think that is the first step for the Homo Universalis, or the potential universal human, to embrace, to cherish, to be in alignment, as Karen said, with that universal part of us. But also, how then do we apply that? How does not just remain in our dreams or in a higher state, but also how we turn that into a reality in our everyday life. So these are some of the threads that are alive with me. And I'm also thinking about the next stages then that these bring, maybe a sense of function, or an archetypal, maybe service that one can do towards humanity. And what are the steps towards that direction, and how that relates to the Homo Universalis?
Well, thank you for narrating this experience and story. It's powerful, it's moving. I can feel, as you describe your experience, there is an evident quality that transfers, and it also is a validation and a confirmation that when we engage in an exploration like this with small or large group of people, we are not merely trading words and concepts. There is a potent, energetic, psychospiritual dimension that you describe as psychoactivating, psychospiritual activation. And yesterday, actually, as I was describing some other element to Jeff Vanderkloot, I heard myself, because that's like, I listen myself to what I'm saying, because sometimes that process is, a lot of the time, is wiser than me. And there was a moment that I described to him, and I said, you could say we were going through a psychospiritual open heart surgery. And he paused on that and he said, yeah, that sounds right. Because when we metabolize and release the scar tissue at an individual level and or at a collective level, there is a transferability of that process to others. And what you were specifically describing was that we were in a dialogue with two people in the middle in the spotlighted area, and as we were exploring a certain modality and inquiry with them, the ecology enabled you to be there in support of them, to witness their discovery with themselves, and at the same time to experience the release of that inquiry in yourself, such that it continued when we ended the process, the collective process, and you went to your evening and to your night and to your sleep, and the entire unfolding could proceed with you. So for us, it's bread and butter that we are dealing with the energetic dimension of the human experience. I'm saying bread and butter because for me, I've been exploring these realms for more than 4 decades. And if I'm including before I knew what I was doing, before I knew consciously that that's what I was doing, it's it's reaching more than 5 decades. So, but it still is not necessarily the way most people permit themselves to engage with life. And I think what you're offering, Kyriaki, is that when we describe the universalis human, we are saying we are going to have to be able to re-embrace those aspects of our life. The somatic experience, the higher sensitivity, the being able to listen inside to our semi and unconscious processes and awarenesses. And all of it is part of the discovery of the liberation that we are sensing in this idea of a universalis human. So where I am, as we bring this conversation to end, and I'll ask you in a minute if there is anything else you would want to bring to the close of this Universalis 9, Deepening in Evolutionary Mysteries. What is coming alive for me just now as I listen to everything we were describing in this is what we're describing as the universalis human is not so much the idea of building something new that's not there latent in the human. It's not even us going to the gym to build a muscle, even though that can at some point be an aspect of it. But in the sense of the conversation today, there is much more of a feeling, experience of bringing to life, liberating something that has been latent. So we're describing capacities and attunement and depth and liberation of sensitivities and sense organs that are latent in the human, and that the universalis release, the universalis release is more than anything a process of liberation rather than acquiring something from the outside. It's not what we acquire from the universe. It's how the universe is liberated in us because of what is already latent in the human. That's where this conversation leads me to, and I always know we were in the right conversation when it leads to considerations and resonance of knowing that never occurred to me in quite the same way before. So that's the yield that's emerging in me right here, right now, having listened to both of you. So thank you.
Thank you.
Can I add a little bit
Please.
at the end? In response to what you were saying, I was thinking about an aspect of the journey through the 4 days, and it slightly surprised me because in some ways I was with it, and I was immersed within. But there was something I was looking for, and I think it's an endorsement of what you're saying, how everything it's a live process that will have revelations that are different to how you think it might be, or how another seminar has been, or how everybody else around you is experiencing it. And that was the tricky bit, because there was a sense, I'm not feeling it in the same way. There's something different going on here. And I had to look through the preceding months that had brought me to the point and the journey that I'd been on. And I thought, well, everyone comes to a seminar from a different place. They come with different linings and different intentions and a different functional stance. This particular one, I'd had different functional roles, and that had caused a certain alignment to some aspects and possibly not others. So I was being a little forensic and thinking, what's going on here? And I thought, well, what was the one thing that really stood out and really caught me? And not to particularly open that up at the moment as to what it was, but there was one thing, and it was different to what I expected and the conversations that were going on around me. So I listened to that, and as I listened to it and thought about it, it really started to open up everything about the seminar in a totally different way than I'd expected. And the reason I'm sharing this now is it's another dimension of belief in ourselves and following the threads that may be a little bit different to what you might expect. And it's a live process, and they will be revealing, because we're talking about an exchange and a dialogue and a process of what is wanting to unfold through the human life, our human lives individually and collectively at this time. And we have to listen. Stop there.
Thank you, Karen. I know you're keeping concealed which moment it was, and I'm guessing that if you open it up, it will take us another hour to metabolize that. So maybe on another one of those Universalis explorations. Thank you very much, Kyriaki and Karen.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Aviv.
Thank you, Aviv, and thank you, Kyriaki.
Along with our website at portalsofperception.org, Portals is also available on YouTube and on all podcast platforms, as well as social media. You can become an active member and join the conversation in community events. And you can help us get the word out by liking this content and by sharing it with your friends.